I never imagined that respect could fade so easily, that love built over decades could turn into quiet humiliation. The morning it happened, the sky itself looked heavy, clouds hanging low over the house I'd once filled with laughter. My name is Zoe. People know me as a calm woman, composed and graceful, someone who doesn't raise her voice or pick fights. But that day, something inside me snapped in a way I never thought possible. Before I take you there, before you judge what I did, let me remind you life teaches us lessons in the cruelest ways. If you've ever been betrayed by the very people you loved most, then you'll understand every word that follows. This is her Retaliation H, eh? And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe because every story here reminds you that strength often rises from heartbreak. It began with silence, the kind of silence that comes when people who live under the same roof no longer share the same heart. My daughter-in-law, Amelia, had been distant for months. She'd changed after the wedding, her smile colder, her tone sharper. My son, Ethan, was blinded by love or maybe guilt. He never saw the growing storm between us. I tried to stay out of their way, pretending not to hear the whispers or the slammed doors. But respect was something I never compromised on. That morning, I walked into the kitchen to make tea. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching on the wedding photo that hung crookedly on the wall. I straightened it, a small habit I had, but as I did, I heard her voice behind me crisp, cutting. "You don't have to touch everything in this house, Zoe. It's not your job anymore." Her words stung sharper than they should have. I know what you were doing. She interrupted, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Trying to make it look like you still run this place." I turned slowly, meeting her eyes. "Amelia, this house belongs to us now," she said, her smile twisted. "You're just staying here until we figure out what to do." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd bought this house with my late husband. Every wall, every tile carried his memory. I wanted to believe she was joking, but there was no laughter in her tone, only pride and cruelty. I didn't respond. I simply picked up my teacup and walked to the living room. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from restraint. Years of dignity held me back from saying what I wanted to. But inside, something burned. Later that day, Ethan came home. His voice was cheerful as always. "Mom, Amelia said she's cooking tonight. Come join us." I looked up from my book. That's kind of her. He didn't notice my tone. He didn't see the tension that clung to the air like smoke. We ate dinner in silence. She barely acknowledged me, and he kept glancing nervously between us. When I reached for the salt, she moved it away, pretending it was accidental. I saw the smirk. I said nothing. After dinner, I went to my room, but as I passed their door, I heard her whispering. She still thinks this house is hers. Maybe it's time she learns her place, my place. The words echoed in my mind. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly. I remembered the day I'd signed the papers, how my husband had insisted the house be in my name alone, just in case. He'd been thoughtful like that. Back then, I'd thought it unnecessary. Now it was my shield, though no one else knew. Morning came, and with it, confrontation. I was in the garden trimming roses when Amelia came out, her tone sharp again. "Zoe, I think it's time you started packing your things." I froze, turning to her. "Excuse me. You heard me. Ethan and I want privacy. You've lived your life, now it's our turn." I put down the shears and faced her fully. "And where do you suggest I go?" She crossed her arms, chin lifted. "Anywhere but here." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, two women, different generations, standing in the same soil but worlds apart. I saw no kindness in her, only entitlement, and in that instant I decided enough was enough. "You know," I said quietly, "you should be careful about telling someone to leave their own home." She blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "What do you mean?" But I didn't answer. I simply walked back inside, my mind already turning. Hours passed. She didn't bring it up again, perhaps assuming I'd give in. But when the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange, she entered my room without knocking. "Since you're taking your time, I thought I'd help you pack," she said coldly. And before I could stop her, she started opening my wardrobe, pulling out my clothes and tossing them into a suitcase. I watched her for a moment, calm too calm. Then softly I laughed, a low, cold laugh that made her freeze. "What's so funny?" she snapped. "This house is mine, Amelia." I said, my voice even, "You're the one who needs to get out." Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I walked to the dresser, opened the top drawer, and took out a folded document, the original deed. I handed it to her. "Read it." She scanned the paper, her face draining of color. "No, this can't be." "Oh, but it is." I said quietly, "Your husband doesn't own a single brick here, so if anyone's leaving, it's you." Before she could respond, Ethan's voice thundered from the hallway. "What's going on here?" He entered, his face red with anger, eyes darting between us. Amelia, desperate, held up the paper. "She's lying. She's trying to throw me out." "I'm not lying," I said calmly. "You'd know that if you ever bothered to ask whose name is on the title." He turned to me, disbelief turning to fury. "How could you do this, Mom? How could you make me feel like a guest in my own house?" I wanted to tell him the truth, that I'd done it to protect him, that his father had thought of this for our security. But before I could, he grabbed a chair, his breath ragged. "You think you can control everything," he shouted. He raised the chair, eyes blazing. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be scared, lost, confused. Then he swung. The sound of the chair cracking against the wall echoed like thunder, but he froze mid-swing when he realized what I'd done. I hadn't moved away. I'd simply looked at him, unflinching, calm as stone. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "If this is the son I raised, then maybe I deserve it." The chair slipped from his hands. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Amelia stood there, silent, pale. Ethan's breath came in short gasps, shame flooding his face. From that day on, he never dared look me in the eye again. But the story didn't end there, because sometimes the moment you stand up for yourself is only the beginning of your true retaliation. The chair still lay on the floor between us, its leg cracked, a small splinter dangling like the last thread of our family's peace. Ethan's shoulders heaved, his eyes darting away from mine, shame twisting his features. I didn't speak, not because I had nothing to say, but because words felt meaningless now. Silence was stronger, silence was heavier. Amelia was the first to move. She turned sharply and stormed out, muttering something under her breath that neither of us caught. The front door slammed, the sound echoing through the house like the closing of a chapter. Ethan didn't follow her. He stood there for a long time, breathing hard, his hands trembling slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost broken. "You've changed, Mom." I looked at him and felt an ache I couldn't describe. "No, Ethan, I've always been like this. You just never saw it before." He didn't respond. He walked out without another word, leaving me alone in the half-dark room. I sat down slowly, the weight of years pressing against my chest. My hands shook as I reached for the old photo frame on the table, me, my husband, and a young Ethan, smiling, standing right in front of this same house. Back then, love felt unbreakable. We'd built our lives here, brick by brick, dream by dream. But life changes quietly, without warning, and sometimes love turns into something you can barely recognize. That night, I didn't sleep. I could still hear the echo of the chair, the sound of anger, and beneath it all, the haunting whisper of my late husband's voice, "Take care of him, Zoe. Even when he forgets how to take care of you." I closed my eyes and whispered back into the empty room. "I did, Michael. I tried." The next morning, the house felt strangely quiet. Amelia hadn't come back. Ethan's car was still in the driveway, but I didn't hear him moving around. I brewed a pot of coffee and set 2 cups on the table, more out of habit than hope. The smell filled the kitchen, soft and comforting. When he finally appeared, he looked tired, the kind of tired that goes deeper than the body. "Where's Amelia?" I asked softly, at her mother's. He said flatly. Then after a pause, she says she won't come back until you're gone. I nodded slowly. "And what do you say?" He stared into his coffee, avoiding my eyes. "You could stay somewhere else for a while, just until things cool down." For a moment, I thought I might cry, but I didn't. I just smiled sadly. "You mean until she gets what she wants?" He didn't answer. "Ethan," I said quietly, "do you remember when you broke your arm climbing that old apple tree? You were 8. You fell, and I ran out barefoot to get you. You cried all the way to the hospital, and the first thing you asked when we got there was if your father would be mad." He looked up, surprised by the memory. "He wasn't mad," I continued. "He was proud. He said that's how boys learn, by falling and getting back up. You learned that day, but now I'm not sure you remember how." He exhaled heavily, guilt flashing across his face. "Mom, it's not that simple. A marriage doesn't erase loyalty." I interrupted softly, "and respect doesn't come with conditions." For a long time, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice cracked. "I didn't mean to scare you. I know," I said gently, "but you did." He left again soon after, claiming he needed to clear his head. I didn't stop him. Instead, I spent the day cleaning. It wasn't about tidying up. It was about reclaiming something, my space, my peace. I opened windows, let the air rush in, the scent of rain mixing with the faint smell of lilies from the garden. As I dusted the shelves, I found old letters from Michael, yellowed with age. I sat down and began to read one. His handwriting was steady and warm. "My dearest Zoe, if you ever find yourself alone in this house, promise me you'll remember what it took to build it, not the money, not the bricks, but the strength that carried us through everything. The house isn't just ours, it's you. I held the letter close to my heart, my vision blurring. That's when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. For a moment, I thought Ethan had returned, but when I looked out the window, I froze. It wasn't his car, it was Amelia's. She stepped out, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. I braced myself as she walked to the door and rang the bell once, sharply. I opened it, calm as ever. "Forgot something?" I asked. She pushed past me without answering, storming straight into the living room. "Where's Ethan?" she demanded. "Not here." She looked around, scanning the space like she was measuring it, claiming it in her mind again. Then she turned to me. "You think you've won, don't you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Won? Amelia, this isn't a competition. It's a home." She laughed bitterly. "Home? You mean your museum of old memories? You should have left gracefully when you had the chance, Grace." I said softly, "Isn't something you demand from others. It's something you learn." Her face tightened. "You think you're so wise, don't you? So untouchable. But Ethan loves me. He'll choose me over you any day. Maybe," I said, my voice calm but steady. "But if love means turning your son against his mother, then maybe you should ask yourself what kind of love that really is." For the first time, she hesitated. I saw something flicker in her eyes, not guilt, not remorse, but fear. A realization that she might be losing control. She turned sharply and walked to the door. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. "No, Amelia, I already have. I just won't do it again." She left, slamming the door behind her. But this time, the silence that followed felt different, lighter, freer. I stood there for a long time, the wind from the open window brushing against my face. Somewhere deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. Amelia wasn't the type to surrender easily, but I also knew something else. I wasn't the same woman I used to be. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but under that calm, tension simmered like embers waiting to ignite. I spent mornings tending to the garden, afternoons going through old family albums, and evenings in the kitchen, preparing meals that no one would eat without complaint. Amelia had made it clear she wasn't returning, yet she lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every time the wind rattled the windows or the floorboards creaked, I half expected her to appear, demanding her perceived rights. But with every passing hour, I reminded myself I wasn't the woman to shrink in fear. Ethan avoided me. He barely spoke when he was home, his eyes downcast, voice quiet. I knew the guilt he carried wasn't entirely for me. It was for his wife, for the mistake he had made in choosing her over the bond we shared. But guilt alone doesn't heal a family. Guilt only teaches lessons if someone is willing to learn. I wasn't sure he understood that yet. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of molten orange, a thought struck me. If Amelia thought she could intimidate me, if she believed that my son's loyalty could be shaken with her words and subtle manipulations, then she was sorely mistaken. I had waited too long, tolerated too much. It was time to take control in ways she would never anticipate. I began by observing her patterns. Every message, every phone call from her, every social media post was a thread I could pull. Knowledge, I realized, was the greatest weapon. I didn't need to fight physically. The battle was psychological, and I had decades of experience understanding people. Amelia had overestimated her power and underestimated mine. The first test came one rainy afternoon. I received a text from Ethan, nervous and hesitant. "Mom, she's coming back tomorrow. She says she wants to talk things through." I stared at my phone, the raindrops pattering against the window like tiny drums of warning. A part of me felt a thrill not at confrontation, but at opportunity. "Talk things through," she said. How quaint, as if words alone could erase the arrogance, the disrespect, the years of entitlement. I prepared the house quietly that evening. Nothing obvious, nothing ostentatious. I simply made small adjustments, subtle shifts in arrangement, lighting, and sound. The kind of changes that would make someone like Amelia uncomfortable without them noticing why. It was tactical, precise. I was reclaiming my space one invisible step at a time. When she arrived the next day, drenched from the rain, I greeted her calmly, offering a towel. Her eyes narrowed, studying my every move. "You look fine," she said, trying to mask irritation with forced politeness. "Thank you." I replied lightly, "It's good to see you." She stepped in, scanning the house as though expecting it to tremble at her presence. I led her to the living room, careful to maintain a serene demeanor. "Shall we sit?" I asked. She scoffed, crossing her legs tightly. "I just want to settle this quickly, Ethan and I. We deserve peace here." "Peace?" I repeated, letting the word linger. "You mean control." Her smile faltered. "Control, yes. You may have thought taking over would be simple, that you could manipulate him into thinking I'm an obstacle, but I've been here longer. I know this house, this family, this life in ways you never will." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't act like you're scary, Zoe. You're not." I leaned back, my expression gentle but my eyes sharp. "I don't have to be scary. I just have to exist, and that alone terrifies you, doesn't it?" Her fingers trembled slightly around her cup. I didn't miss it. Small cracks revealed the truth, and hers were showing. Amelia had never encountered someone like me, someone calm, composed, utterly unshakable. She thrived on conflict, drama, aggression. I thrived on control, precision, and patience. For the next hour, we exchanged words that sounded polite but cut deeply, each sentence layered with unspoken truths. I let her talk, listened carefully, responded softly, each reply calibrated to leave her frustrated second, guessing, questioning herself. By the time she left that afternoon, she was tense, cautious, her arrogance chipped. That night, I reflected on what had happened. I wasn't angry, not in the fiery, uncontrolled way. I was focused, deliberate. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about immediate gratification. It was about preparation, timing, and precision. Amelia had made the mistake of thinking she could intimidate me. That mistake would cost her far more than she could imagine. Ethan didn't return that evening. I wasn't worried. I knew he needed space. In fact, keeping him distant allowed me to operate without interference. The family, the home, the dynamics, everything was a game of subtle moves and careful observation. And I was patient. Days turned into a week. Amelia's attempts to assert dominance became predictable. Every phone call, every indirect message, every manipulation I anticipated. She was like a storm, loud, chaotic, seemingly unstoppable. But storms eventually run out of energy, and when they do, the aftermath reveals who is truly prepared. I prepared myself for the next phase, knowing that Amelia would test me again. She always did. But I was ready, not with rage, not with threats, but with strategy, patience, and the cold knowledge that the house, this home, my sanctuary, was mine to protect. And so the real game began. The following morning, the house was quiet, almost eerily so. I moved through it with purpose, a silent predator in familiar territory. Every room, every corner, every little detail had a story, and every story was a reminder of what was mine. Amelia had tried to claim it, to bend it to her will, but she didn't realize that control was never about who shouted the loudest. Control was subtle, invisible, and often invisible until it was too late. I started with small things: a misplaced vase here, a gently locked drawer there, a phone message subtly intercepted. Nothing overt, nothing that would alert her to my awareness. But every time she tried to act, to assert dominance, she was met with invisible resistance. A delayed email, a canceled appointment, a subtle rearrangement of the house that made her feel off balance. It was psychological warfare, quiet and precise. By midweek, I noticed changes in Amelia's demeanor. She arrived later each day, her steps heavier, her smile forced. She tried to act confident in front of Ethan, but I could see it, the tension in her jaw, the uncertainty in her eyes. It was working. She was losing control without realizing it. Ethan remained caught in the middle, torn between his loyalty to his wife and the growing realization of what he had ignored for too long. I didn't push him, I didn't need to. Observing him, listening, and letting him arrive at the truth on his own was far more effective than any confrontation. One evening, Amelia came into the living room while I was reading, drenched from the rain, a look of determination on her face. "Zoe," she said, attempting firmness, "I want a truce. We need to talk honestly this time." I looked up slowly, my expression calm, serene. "A truce," I repeated. "Do you even know what that means?" She blinked, startled by my tone. "I mean a ceasefire. We can't keep fighting like this forever." I set the book down gently. "You see, Amelia, this isn't about fighting. This is about respect, about understanding that some things aren't yours to take. A truce would mean you acknowledge that this house, this family, and the life you married into are not just yours to control." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You make it sound so simple, Zoe, but you've taken everything I thought I had. Ethan, this house, everything. I won't just disappear." "I never asked you to disappear." I said softly, my voice steady. "I asked you to respect what already exists, but you refused. So now I'm showing you gently, patiently, that some things cannot be forced. They must be earned, or you must step aside." For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, finally, she sat down heavily, a mixture of exhaustion and frustration in her posture. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was victory. She was beginning to understand that I wasn't someone who could be intimidated. Ethan entered the room silently, and the tension was palpable. His eyes darted between us, the weight of his choices written across his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure whether to intervene or remain quiet. I smiled faintly at him. Sometimes, son, the lesson isn't in the argument. It's in observation. Watch and learn. Amelia's gaze sharpened, realizing the double meaning in my words. She had thought she could manipulate the situation, play the role of the dominant figure. But the more she tried, the more apparent it became her attempts only highlighted her insecurity and lack of control. That night, as the house grew dark and quiet, I sat alone in the living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows. My mind was alive with possibilities. The storm was no longer external. It was contained, controlled. And now, the next steps could be taken with precision, with strategy, with the quiet knowledge that every move I made was leading to a final reckoning. I wasn't just protecting my home, I was reclaiming it, and Amelia, with all her arrogance, would learn that no amount of shouting, no manipulation, no anger could override the force of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering patience, observation, and resilience. By the end of the week, the subtle shifts in the house, the unspoken tension, and the quiet dominance I had asserted had begun to fracture Amelia's confidence completely. Her texts grew curt, her calls less frequent, and when she did appear, she was wary, cautious, almost polite. She had learned something essential. I was not a woman to be trifled with, and yet the real satisfaction wasn't in watching her falter. It was in knowing that when the final moment came, she would realize she had been outmaneuvered entirely without ever seeing the trap laid before her. Every smile, every calm word, every gesture I made had been part of a strategy decades in the making, and the storm, the real storm, had yet to strike. The next morning, the house felt different. There was a tangible weight in the air, a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. Amelia's attempts at subtle dominance had failed, and now the atmosphere belonged entirely to me. I moved through each room with confidence, placing things deliberately, adjusting light and shadow, setting an invisible rhythm she couldn't disrupt. The house had always been alive, every corner, every creaking floorboard, but now it pulsed with a controlled energy, one that reflected my authority. Ethan remained distant, still processing the events of the past week. I didn't try to coax him or guilt him. He was watching, learning, understanding without me saying a single word. The true lesson wasn't in punishment. It was in observation and consequence. I needed Amelia to realize that every choice she made had a direct reflection on her reality. She returned that afternoon, drenched from another sudden rain, her expression carefully composed, but I could see the faint tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her hair. She entered cautiously, her eyes scanning the rooms, taking in the subtle changes I'd made. The arrangement of the furniture, the muted light, even the slight scent of jasmine in the air, all deliberate. I could feel her unease. "You've rearranged things," she said carefully. "Did it bother you?" I asked, casually folding a napkin on the dining table. It's different," she replied, trying to sound confident. "But maybe, it's fine." I allowed a small smile. "Fine," I echoed. "Amelia, let me explain something. Control is not about volume or about who shouts louder or who manipulates emotions. Control is subtle, it's quiet. It's invisible until it's too late, and now you are noticing that I am in control, whether you like it or not." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. I could see her internal struggle, the recognition that she was no longer the one who dictated what happened in this house. I poured a cup of tea for myself and set it on the table, then gestured for her to sit. "We can do this the easy way," I said gently, "or the hard way, your choice, but understand this, you've already stepped into the wrong game." She sat down reluctantly, crossing her arms. "And what if I refuse to play by your rules? Then you'll find yourself on the losing side," I said softly, "and losing isn't pretty, Amelia, especially when it could have been avoided." Her eyes flicked to the window, then back at me. The storm outside had lessened, but the storm inside her was obvious. Every decision she'd made, every attempt to assert herself, had led her here exposed, uneasy, and on the edge of losing everything she had tried to claim. I leaned back, watching her struggle silently. The satisfaction wasn't in my words, it was in her reaction, the slow realization that she had underestimated me completely. Every move she had made to dominate, to manipulate, to intimidate, had been countered before she even realized it. This was the culmination of patience, strategy, and careful observation, a true reclaiming of what was mine. Ethan arrived shortly after, standing silently in the doorway, unsure whether to intervene or remain an observer. I caught his eye and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. The lesson had been learned without a single shout or confrontation. Respect, loyalty, and authority weren't demanded. They were observed, acknowledged, and earned. Amelia's posture faltered, and she finally spoke in a quieter voice, almost a whisper. I see, yes. I said softly, my tone calm but firm, you see now, and I hope you never forget it. She stood, gathering her composure and forcing a polite nod before exiting the room. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. For the first time, I felt the full weight of victory. The house was mine again, my authority restored, my peace reclaimed. I moved to the window, watching the rain-drenched garden glisten in the fading sunlight. Ethan joined me silently, a quiet understanding passing between us. No words were needed. He had learned what I had hoped he would, that strength, patience, and calm control always triumph over arrogance and entitlement. That night, as the house settled into a rare, perfect stillness, I sat in the living room and allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't struck anyone, and yet the lesson had been delivered. Amelia had learned that day what it truly meant to disrespect someone who had built everything from the ground up, someone who had the patience and resolve to wait until the perfect moment to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. And so the first chapter of my retaliation came to a close. The house, the family, and my dignity were intact. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained, etched into the memory of everyone involved. From that day on, no one dared challenge me in my own home again. The morning after Amelia's latest retreat, the house felt lighter, but my mind was already turning, planning the next steps. Victory within the walls was one thing. The world outside was a different battlefield. I knew Amelia wouldn't give up easily, and Ethan's loyalty was still fragile, still testing boundaries. There had to be a lesson that extended beyond the confines of these rooms, one that would ensure neither of them ever underestimated me again. I began quietly observing Amelia from a distance. Her social media posts, her calls, the way she interacted with friends and colleagues, all were small windows into her growing desperation. She was trying to assert control in the public eye, portraying a perfect life, flawless marriage, and a confident front. But cracks appeared in subtle ways, the slight hesitation in her tone, the forced smiles in photos, the careful phrasing of her captions. Every small imperfection was a thread I could pull. Ethan was no longer merely a bystander, he was part of the strategy. He had begun to see the truth, the fragility in Amelia's bravado, and I guided him without pushing. His loyalty, once divided, was slowly shifting back where it belonged. He observed, he learned, and he began to act with caution, wary of the consequences of ignoring the reality that had always existed. One afternoon, Amelia called, her voice a mixture of irritation and forced civility. "Zoe, we need to discuss finances," she said. "There are things Ethan and I want to sort out." I smiled, soft and controlled. "Of course. Shall we meet at the office?" I suggested a place neutral enough for her comfort, yet intimate enough that the power dynamics were clear. She agreed, probably thinking she could maintain dominance in a professional setting. But she underestimated me. I arrived first, my presence calm but commanding. When she entered, dripping from the rain, her carefully curated confidence faltered under my gaze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make threats. I simply sat, poised, calm, letting the silence speak for me. "You know," I said softly, "this isn't just about money. It's about understanding the value of respect and trust. You've tried to rewrite reality, but reality remains." Her eyes flickered, unsure whether I was angry or amused. "Zoe, I'm not here to fight. I just want clarity. Clarity." I echoed, "is recognizing your position without illusions. You wanted control, but you failed to see that control requires more than shouting or charm. It requires strength, patience, and wisdom, qualities you've shown in glimpses but never fully possessed." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee, the bravado she had worn for months slipping imperceptibly. Every word I spoke was calculated to chip away at her confidence, to make her realize the magnitude of her miscalculations without outright confrontation. I was teaching subtly, gently, and mercilessly. Ethan watched from across the table, quiet, thoughtful. He had begun to understand fully, though I knew he still struggled with guilt and loyalty. I met his gaze briefly, allowing a small nod to pass between us. He understood that my plan wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, measured and precise. By the end of the meeting, Amelia left with a forced smile, tense and uncertain, a stark contrast to the confidence she had projected when she arrived. I remained seated, calm, knowing that the seeds of my strategy had taken root. Over the next several days, subtle actions continued. I arranged small setbacks for Amelia, delays in meetings, minor embarrassments that weren't visible to the world but rattled her confidence. She tried to regain composure, but every attempt met an invisible resistance when she couldn't identify. Every carefully crafted text or gesture of dominance was met with quiet, unwavering control on my part. Ethan, meanwhile, began to assert his position quietly but firmly, guided by the lessons he had absorbed from my patience and strategy. He no longer blindly followed Amelia's whims, but measured his actions carefully. The son who had once been torn in half by love and fear was slowly becoming whole again, recognizing the values that truly mattered. Then came the day when Amelia realized she was truly outmaneuvered. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A phone call she had planned to manipulate became awkward. An appointment she intended to use as leverage slipped from her grasp. Every carefully laid plan unraveled before her eyes, and for the first time, she confronted the reality that her attempts at dominance were meaningless. I didn't confront her directly. I didn't need to. Her awareness of her failure was more powerful than anything I could say. The lesson had been delivered elegantly, silently, and irrevocably. That night, as the rain fell softly against the windows of my home, I sat alone, the quiet, triumphant hum of the house surrounding me. I reflected on the journey, the years of patience, the careful observation, the restrained wrath. Amelia had underestimated me, Ethan had faltered, but both had learned valuable lessons about respect, loyalty, and the consequences of their choices. And as I watched the soft glow of the garden lights flicker against the wet earth, I knew that this was only the beginning. Revenge, when executed with precision, patience, and clarity, was more than just a moment. It was a legacy, a story of strength, intelligence, and the quiet power of someone who refuses to be disrespected. The days that followed were a delicate dance of observation and subtle strategy, every movement, every word measured to maintain my authority, while quietly dismantling Amelia's false sense of control. I tracked her patterns, the way she manipulated situations, the way she flaunted confidence that was slowly crumbling under invisible pressure. Ethan remained caught in the tension, silently learning the depth of Amelia's arrogance and the strength of patience and precision I had cultivated over decades. One afternoon, Amelia attempted to assert herself with a calculated calm, insisting we discuss finances and matters she thought would give her leverage. But I met her with serene composure, guiding the conversation with measured words that left her second, guessing, her carefully constructed confidence beginning to falter. Every glance, every subtle shift in tone, every gentle correction chipped away at her bravado, forcing her to confront a reality she had refused to see. She was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and powerless to change the natural order that had always belonged to me. Ethan watched silently, internalizing the lessons without intervention, understanding that control was not demanded through anger or manipulation, but earned through patience, observation, and undeniable authority. In the following days, I orchestrated minor setbacks not overt, but enough to unsettle her missed opportunities, delayed responses, subtle disruptions to her routine that she could not identify or counter, each one quietly teaching her the consequences of overstepping boundaries. Her attempts to regain dominance only revealed deeper cracks in her composure, and each misstep fed into the narrative I had been constructing. That arrogance and disrespect are fragile, easily dismantled by precision and calm resolve. The culmination of my efforts became painfully clear to her when even her carefully laid plans began to unravel. Phone calls she intended to manipulate, meetings she hoped to control, every attempt met invisible resistance. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had misjudged the situation entirely, that her belief in dominance was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. I never needed to speak harshly or raise my voice. Her awareness of failure carried more weight than any confrontation could. And through it all, Ethan's perception shifted, his loyalty mending and realigning with reality, understanding the value of patience, respect, and unwavering strength. That night, as rain softly pattered against the windows, I allowed myself a quiet smile, reflecting on the long journey of restraint, calculated observation, and gentle yet relentless retaliation. Amelia had learned, Ethan had grown, and the house, my sanctuary, had been fully reclaimed. The storm outside subsided, but the lasting lesson lingered. Power lies in patience, in quiet observation, and in the unshakable confidence of someone who refuses to be disrespected. And that legacy would remain long after the echoes of anger had faded. The morning light spilled across the living room, painting the walls with warmth, but I didn't feel lighthearted. The calm was deliberate, a facade of serenity that hid the storm I had meticulously prepared. Amelia's arrogance had been chipped, Ethan's loyalty slowly realigned, but the final act required precision, patience, and unwavering control. Today, the house, the family, and my legacy would be fully secured. I moved silently through the rooms, adjusting small details that only I would notice: the subtle alignment of objects, the faint scent of lavender in the air, the soft lighting that made the space feel both welcoming and subtly commanding. Every choice was deliberate, an unspoken reminder that I was not merely present. I was the architect of everything within these walls. Outside, the world continued in its chaos, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding within this home. Amelia believed she could reclaim dominance, but she had not yet understood the depth of my resolve. She had underestimated me in ways that would cost her dearly. The first sign of her return came with the soft click of the front gate, her heels tapping a forced rhythm across the driveway. I was prepared, calm as ever, my presence filling the entryway as she stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the rooms, seeking subtle changes, her confidence wavering despite her best efforts to mask it. "Zoe," she said, voice tight, attempting authority. "We need to talk now. Ethan and I can't keep living like this." I smiled faintly, letting my calm demeanor contrast her tension. "Talk?" I echoed softly, is meaningless without understanding. "Perhaps you need to see what consequences come from disrespect and misjudgment." She tried to maintain composure, her posture stiff, but I could sense the subtle tremors beneath the small cracks in her arrogance that had begun to widen. Ethan followed quietly behind her, eyes lowered, hesitant, aware that today would mark a turning point in our family dynamic. I led them to the living room, guiding them gently, silently, to where the day's revelations would unfold. "You've tried," I said softly, "to assert control, to dominate, to rewrite reality in your favor. But control is not a fleeting performance. Control is patience, understanding, and respect. You have none of these where it matters." Amelia's lips pressed together, her composure slipping despite her attempt at defiance. Ethan's gaze flickered between us, conflicted, uneasy, but grounded in a newfound understanding. I allowed silence to stretch, letting the weight of my words unspoken and spoken settle. Then, slowly, deliberately, I began revealing truths she had tried to hide from herself. Minor financial discrepancies, subtle manipulations of social perception, instances where her arrogance had isolated her from friends and colleagues, every observation laid bare, not with anger, but with calm clarity. Her forced confidence faltered with every revelation, each realization a chisel breaking away at the facade she had constructed. Ethan listened, absorbing the clarity of my actions, the depth of my planning, the precision of my retaliation. He had been blind, caught between loyalty and love, but now he began to see the truth, that the woman who had guided him, protected him, and built the foundation of their lives had always been the force behind stability, patience, and intelligence. Amelia tried to respond, tried to assert herself, but her words were hollow, her arguments crumbling under the weight of facts and observation. Every attempt to regain dominance was met with a quiet, unshakable presence that she could not confront. I did not need to yell, to threaten, to strike. The power of my control was in my composure, my patience, and the inevitability of consequence. Hours passed. By the end of the day, Amelia's arrogance had fully eroded, replaced with a tentative understanding of her failures. Ethan's loyalty was fully realigned, his respect and care for me evident without a word exchanged. I had won not through rage, but through calculated patience, observation, and the unrelenting quiet strength that had guided me all these years. That night, as the house settled into a rare, perfect stillness, I walked through each room, touching familiar surfaces, feeling the weight of decades of memories, battles, and victories. This was my sanctuary, my domain, my life reclaimed fully and irrevocably. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft and cleansing, washing away the remnants of conflict, leaving clarity in its place. I sat by the window, watching droplets slide along the glass, reflecting the light like scattered diamonds. Ethan entered quietly, standing beside me. No words were needed. The understanding was mutual. Amelia had learned her lesson, the depth of her misjudgment, the limits of her control, the cost of arrogance, and I had taught it without cruelty, without anger, through strategy, patience, and unwavering authority. Life had shown once again that those who underestimate the strength and resolve of someone who has lived, suffered, and persevered often face consequences they cannot foresee. And as I closed my eyes that night, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that not only had my home and family been fully secured, but the legacy of respect, patience, and measured retaliation would remain a lesson that would resonate far beyond these walls, echoing in the hearts and minds of those who thought they could challenge me. From that day forward, No one dared test my resolve. No one dared to undermine the authority I had patiently reclaimed. And the story of my calm yet absolute retaliation would remain a permanent testament to strength, wisdom, and the unstoppable power of a woman who refuses to be disrespected. The morning was deceptively calm, the sunlight streaming softly through the windows as if unaware of the storm I had quietly set in motion. Amelia had grown cautious, her arrogance tempered by weeks of subtle yet relentless observation and retaliation. Ethan, once torn between loyalty and love, had realigned fully, his respect and understanding now rooted in clarity rather than obligation. But the final act, the ultimate lesson, had yet to unfold. Today, the reckoning would be complete. I moved through the house with a quiet sense of purpose, every detail meticulously prepared, every space arranged to assert invisible authority. The furniture, the lighting, even the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air, was deliberate, a subtle yet undeniable message that control, true control, could not be taken, only earned or surrendered. I had no intention of shouting, of confronting violently, or of creating chaos. My method was patience, precision, and psychological mastery. Amelia believed she could manipulate outcomes, intimidate, or charm her way back into dominance, but she was gravely mistaken. She arrived mid-morning, her steps hesitant, posture rigid, eyes flicking nervously across rooms that once belonged only to her fantasies of control. I greeted her calmly, offering a neutral smile that belied the storm I carried beneath my composure. "Good morning, Amelia," I said softly. "I trust you slept well." Her lips pressed tightly together, the forced civility failing to mask tension. "We need to discuss our future," she said, her voice attempting strength, though uncertainty crept in. "This situation cannot continue." I nodded slowly, guiding her to the living room, where the sun pooled across the hardwood floor. "Indeed," I said, "it cannot. But the future depends on understanding choices, consequences, and respect, three things that have been sorely lacking." She shifted uneasily, clearly recognizing that I wasn't just speaking to her, but to the very mistakes she had made in underestimating me. Ethan followed quietly behind, silent yet attentive, watching as the final lesson unfolded. I began with the subtle truths she had tried to conceal: financial inconsistencies, mismanaged social obligations, and small but impactful manipulations meant to portray control and dominance. Each revelation was delivered calmly, softly, yet with undeniable clarity. She squirmed under the weight of her errors, realizing that her efforts to dominate had only exposed her own fragility. Ethan absorbed every detail, processing the depth of deception and manipulation he had once overlooked. He no longer defended her actions blindly. His perception had shifted, his loyalty now aligned with the reality I had carefully orchestrated. Amelia's voice trembled as she tried to interject to defend herself, but her arguments faltered under the precision of my observations. Every sentence she spoke only highlighted her failures further. I didn't interrupt her, allowing silence to amplify the impact of her own words collapsing. She had always relied on arrogance, charm, and subtle manipulation to maintain control. But each tactic was now reflected back at her through unshakable composure and strategic clarity. The psychological pressure mounted, invisible yet palpable, until she began to grasp the full extent of her miscalculations. Hours passed in quiet confrontation, the air thick with tension. I remained calm, deliberate, observing every micro-expression, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. Each moment was a reinforcement of the lesson Amelia had stubbornly refused to learn. Respect cannot be demanded, dominance cannot be claimed by force, and arrogance is always fragile under the scrutiny of intelligence and patience. Ethan stood quietly beside me, watching, silently internalizing the lessons without needing to speak. He understood that the outcome had not been achieved through brute force or anger, but through deliberate, measured control. By late afternoon, Amelia was visibly defeated. Her posture sagged, her forced composure unraveling, eyes darting as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. She realized that the house, the family, and the authority she had tried to claim were no longer within her grasp. She had been outmaneuvered in every possible way, and the consequences of her choices lay bare before her. The humiliation was not public, yet it was profound, a private reckoning that only she could feel. Ethan stepped forward quietly, his voice calm yet resolute. "Mom, I see now," he said, glancing at Amelia. "I understand what I didn't before. All of this, it's not just about the house. It's about respect, loyalty, and the consequences of our actions." Amelia looked at him, a flicker of panic crossing her face as she recognized the shift in his perception. She had miscalculated everything: his allegiance, her influence, and the limits of her control. I allowed a soft smile to touch my lips. "Ethan is correct," I said gently. "Lessons are learned not through anger or punishment, but through understanding and consequence. Amelia, the choices you made, the disrespect you displayed, and the arrogance you carried have led you here. It is not malice, it is clarity." Tears threatened in her eyes as she realized the depth of her misjudgment. Her attempts at dominance, her manipulation of situations, and her reliance on charm and intimidation had all failed. The final lesson was complete, not because I had forced it, but because I had allowed the natural consequences of her choices to unfold under careful guidance. She had confronted reality fully, irrevocably, and painfully. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the house, I walked through the rooms, touching familiar surfaces, feeling the weight of years, victories, and lessons learned. The home was mine, the family aligned, and the legacy of respect, patience, and strategic mastery secured. Ethan stood beside me, silent but deeply aware, understanding that strength is not shown in anger but in composure, not in intimidation but in deliberate and unwavering authority. Amelia had been humbled, her arrogance dismantled, her perception forever altered. The storm had ended, leaving clarity, understanding, and respect in its wake. And as I gazed out into the rain, drenched garden, the soft patter against the windows, I knew that this was not just a story of retaliation, it was a testament. A testament to patience, intelligence, and the quiet yet unstoppable power of someone who refuses to be disrespected, underestimated, or ignored. From that day forward, no one dared challenge me. No one dared test the boundaries of respect. And the lessons I had delivered, silently and flawlessly, would resonate far beyond these walls. The ultimate victory was complete, not in spectacle, not in anger, but in the calm, absolute certainty that strength, when paired with patience and precision, is unassailable, undeniable, and eternal.